Hello friends, I have to tell you all about C60 Purple Power. Since I started using C60, which may be the most powerful antioxidant known to man, I feel amazing, and you should too. I have more energy, I sleep better, and I've lost over 30 pounds. But please go check it out for yourself. It has so many amazing benefits. Just click the link in the description or visit c60purplepower.com and use coupon code KNOWLEDGE10 to get 10% off your order plus free shipping. That's C60 Purple Power. Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Tonight, my guest is Michelle Freed. Before I bring her on, I want to remind you to subscribe to Forbidden Knowledge News on Odyssey. We're also available on all popular podcast platforms, and definitely check us out on Rokfin, where you get all our premium content. You even get all our regular shows and all the premium content from all the amazing content creators on Rokfin. I also want to tell you how you can keep your private data to yourself with next-generation security. NordVPN protects your internet traffic with cutting-edge security technologies, ensuring strong and reliable encryption between your device and a VPN server. You can also browse without a trace. NordVPN is based away from the EU and the US jurisdictions and has no obligation to collect your personal data or information. This means they don't record, monitor, store, log, or share anything you do. Just click the link in the description and you can get up to 70% off a 1 or 2 year plan. Tonight I want to welcome Michelle Freed. She is a graduate of the Alternative Practitioner Academy and received certification from the National Guild of Hypnotism. She completed the beginning, intermediate, and advanced training programs through the International School of Clairvoyance, where she learned to integrate her intuitive skills with her hypnosis skills. She is a talented remote viewer and remote viewing instructor. She has research related to remote viewing and parapsychology published with the Journal of Psychical Research, the Parapsychology Association, and 8 Martinis magazine. She also works on special remote viewing projects with IONS, the Institute of Noetic Sciences. She is in the documentary Third Eye Spies and appears on an episode of Ancient Aliens. She is also the former producer for Art Bell Show and currently co-owner of the new Midnight.fm network and producer for the Midnight Society radio show with Tim Weisberg. Michelle, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's great to finally talk to you in person. You know, you've been helping me book shows for, I think, like a couple of years now with some amazing guests, and now you're actually one of those guests. We're going to be discussing all kinds of fun stuff today, including remote viewing, hypnosis, a little bit of Bigfoot, and much more. You've got a fascinating background. You've done some awesome stuff in your life with the talents and with your remote viewing skills and intuitive skills. When did you first realize that you kind of had these enhanced intuitive skills?
Oh, well, I wasn't one of the typical people that feel like as they were growing up, they always had special gifts or anything like that. I think I had the belief that you had to be born with it. And in 2010 or 11, I decided to go on a road trip with my kids. And I had a friend that wrote 3 books on psychic development. And we were going to reconnect because she lived in California and I lived in Chicago. And so we reconnected and she was telling me all about her books and what she does. And she said, you know, Michelle, you should take my class. And I was like, oh, okay. But, I thought you had to be born with it. And she's like, no, everybody's psychic. And she explained, just that everybody has an intuition. And basically, we just kind of don't use it all the time, or we dismiss it, or, things like that. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense. And I'm pretty skeptical. So when I came into this course with her, I really had to, believe it. But class after class, she was, kind of pushing us to do these exercises. And I got to the point where I couldn't explain it anymore. I couldn't make any more excuses, and things were happening that I just couldn't explain. And at some point, she started kind of giving us a quick and dirty, uh, remote viewing class, and just kind of telling us a little about it. And the one thing about remote viewing that I can't stress enough is the idea that it is the kind that I'm talking about is really what Stanford Research Institute came up with back in the 70s, where it has a protocol that you follow, and it's very scientific. So there's some people that can remote view just from their mind. They can project themselves to a location and then just describe it. But this is kind of a protocol where you have to learn certain steps, and then kind of follow this, similar to what the military did, and you use pen and paper and you follow this. And one of the most important things is that they don't tell you what your target is. That's what's very different. You're completely blind. You get a random number, and they don't tell you what the secret question is. And so in hers, what we didn't know is that we were remote viewing um, plants, tomato plants, and they were doing an experiment where they wanted to know which plants had a virus and which plants didn't have a virus. So she calls out the number. It was like an 8-digit number. And the first thing that happened to me is I sneezed, which was weird because, I don't even have allergies, but I just sneezed. But then I just kind of had these impressions that I was describing something like a garden and plants and a picket fence and things like that. I had this vision. And so I felt like I did such a great job, and really wanted to learn more about remote viewing. And then I did, and ended up, you know, really obsessed with it. It's really my passion. And I've been so lucky to be part of a whole bunch of scientific research, as well as really cool projects.
Yeah,
So,
that's really awesome. Now, growing up, aside from any of the studies that you did to kind of enhance your abilities, did you have any experiences that were unexplained or paranormal, or any sightings, anything like that?
not really. I think, like, when I think back, there's a couple things, but nothing that I really paid attention to. I didn't really have that kind of mindset, but I think that, you know, I I must have always had some kind of feeling, because I remember one time going to my dad and asking him who wrote the Bible. And I was like 8. I was really young, and I asked him who wrote the Bible. And he said, well, who do you think wrote the Bible? And I said, the aliens. I mean, that was just such a weird thing for like an 8-year-old, to say. But I think I just always just had a sense. But, as an adult now, I don't recall anything like mind blowing or anything like that that has happened. But I just always suspected that they were around, and I was, just kind of thought it was part of life. So,
Right. Well, now since we've already kind of touched on remote viewing, let's talk a little bit about that. When did you start really kind of getting into it and doing this on your own and, doing your own sessions and stuff like that?
Yeah, so right after I took a bunch of courses, and then I was lucky enough to I took courses from different people. I learned from somebody called John Vivanco. I learned his method. I learned from Lori Williams, who is from Lynn Buchanan. I learned from Joe McMonagle. And then I learned a method called ARV, which is remote viewing, but we use it to predict a future outcome. And so people are currently using it to help companies make a decision on stocks. There's people that are using it in, cryptocurrency. The idea is that you're remote viewing a binary target. So you want to know if something goes up or down, over, under, yes or no. You can even use this method if you want to, should I wear the red dress or the blue dress? Of course, I don't know, Chris, if you'll be wearing dresses, but
Probably not.
I
Nope.
think no, no, okay. But yeah, and making a decision like, should I take the job in Atlanta or should I stay in Chicago? And then there are people that wager on sporting events. They're doing that as well. So that's like a whole nother area. And I feel like um, that could be kind of a future of where remote viewing might be going in one direction. And then you have the other one where it's kind of a long form um, protocol kind of thing. And we help detectives find missing people. We can do a lot of esoteric targets, like big questions that we have in the world that have never been answered. But the thing with those is, you don't really have hardcore feedback. Like, we don't really know if we're right or wrong, but we can definitely get a lot of information. And then also, I worked with we had a client. So I have a manager who I trust. And he said, okay, Michelle, we have somebody that's wants to work with us, and I can't tell you who it is, and I can't tell you what it's about. And so I'm like, okay. So we have a team, and we worked on it, and then we handed in our sessions, and and then afterwards we get feedback. So then we find out what we're viewing. And it turned out that we were hired by Homeland Security because they wanted to know the top 3 threats of the Olympics. So this was about 1 or 2 years before the Olympics in Japan. So when COVID hit, it dawned on me. I started thinking about that session and what I got. And it was interesting because one of the things that I got in my session was I called it a computer virus. And I'm like, wait, a virus was a threat to the Olympics. It wasn't a computer virus. I wasn't right but I was right about a virus.
Right.
And when you're talking about remote viewing, the problem is that you have this right brain, left brain situation where your left brain wants everything to make sense. And the right brain will probably come up with like some kind of virus, and the left brain comes in and says, oh, well, duh, it's a computer virus.
Right.
But that wasn't really correct. But I was on the way. And I was like, wow, like 2 years after this, I'm figuring out that, hey, I was right on target with that. So that was kind of cool to
Yeah.
realize that.
Yeah, that is very interesting. Now, I know that our government or these factions of the government claim to have stopped doing these remote viewing programs years ago. But, seeing as the success that they've had with it, and that I've heard other people, I've had Lynn Buchanan, I've had other remote viewers on the show with me talk about how successful some of these programs were and some of the results that they've had. Do you think that there are possibly still some secret government programs using this? Because I don't see why they really would have dropped it with the success rate of it.
Yeah, I don't know for sure. And what I'm about to say is just my opinion and guessing.
Right.
Um, and there are times where I'm thinking about, hey, we should remote view the government and see if they're doing, kind of do that. But I have a feeling that we might get into trouble by remote viewing them. I think that, if they can do all this, or well, we know they can do all this, that they have ways to kind of put you in a different direction. So I don't think it's a good idea to remote view them. But my guesses are that they are still doing stuff. I think that they're moving into more of a future direction of what to do with this. Because I know that in my research, with who I research with, we are always experimenting. I'm practicing all the time. I'm working with really, really, really intelligent people. And even we are kind of moving remote viewing. It's not the same as it was in the 70s. We're now looking at this like, what's going on? Like, what's happening when we're doing this? And we're looking at the idea that your nervous system gives you a lot of information, and anything that you receive from your nervous system is usually the truth. The problem is when communication comes and we have to use language. And it reminds me of, remember that movie, Arrival? When did you see that movie,
Yes.
Arrival?
Yes.
Okay, and they were trying to communicate with these other beings. And it just kind of made me think about that, because our bodies, um, we can misunderstand even within ourselves. So I think that the government, if they're doing anything, would be incorporating this kind of new step. There is Dr. Oh gosh, what's his name? I'm not sure his name right now, but he did a lot of experiments in this area of the nervous system, and he set up a situation where he worked with a bunch of college students, and he put a bunch of random pictures onto the computer, and the students were connected to, all to get all their vital signs. Their heart was being monitored, their brain was being monitored, kind of like a lie detector test, where you're taking all those measurements. And all they had to do is sit in front of the computer and advance the screen, and it would show different kinds of pictures. And what they learned from this was that their physical body was reacting to a picture before it came, because he would stick in a lot of provocative pictures, like people kissing or somebody, not dressed all the way or whatever. And they found that the students were reacting before the picture showed up. So that was telling us two things: that our body is sensing something in the future, and that our body is sensing and reacting to it. And I don't think that we're always aware of that on a day-to-day basis, to listen to our own body.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that is super interesting. Now, could you tell us a little bit about your process and how it works for you? And if you could maybe try and explain like how it works scientifically or how you feel it works, you know?
Well, so remote viewing, when it was the protocol was put together, it was done by Ingo Swann and Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ. And to me, they're just geniuses. Sometimes when I look at this, I'm like, how did they ever imagine how this all works? Like, to me, I just can't imagine the intelligence. Um, but it does work. And one of the things that is important to know, because a lot of people will come up to anybody psychic or remote viewer and they'll say, well, you know, why can't we just win the lottery? If you're so psychic, why can't you just tell me the numbers of the lottery? Well, one of the problems is that we're human. And for example, Joe McMoneagle would say this all the time. He said, to be a world-class remote viewer, you have to pretty much give up being human. And what that actually means is what I sort of said earlier, where I was talking about left brain and right brain. The problem is that you have to manage your left brain and your right brain, because part of being human is finding patterns in the world and labeling them. So for example, if I said to you, there's something red, it's shiny, it's round, the first thing you might think, oh, it's an apple. And then, you see something, you perceive something else, and you'll say, well, it's tubular, it's long, it's curved, it's, beige color, it's squishy. And then because you said apple, you're going to perceive, oh, this was a banana. But what if the target is actually a fire truck with a hose on it? So we have to be really careful on managing your left brain and your right brain. So a lot of the information that we get is doesn't really make sense, because the right brain is it uses metaphors to communicate and symbols to communicate. So when we remote view, we use very low level concepts. We will perceive something, and as the images come to us, we sense them. We ask about, does this smell? Does it taste? Does it, is it man-made? Is it natural? And those kinds of things. And then as you progress through the session, and the way that the session is formed, you start creating some kind of, you collect all this information, it kind of comes together, and then when the person, you hand it to a judge or someone that's going to analyze it, then they're going to put it all together to make sense of it. So that's like kind of a simple version of how it works.
I see. And is there anything, because I know I've spoken with people who do remote viewing before, and they each have different processes. Is there anything specific that you do that may be different?
I like to cool down, just kind of get, I think it's really important for me to just kind of have a set aside, like the difference between walking into the remote viewing realm, I guess you could say, and the everyday realm. And so I just kind of built into my session is this kind of transit where I'm walking over this line, and I kind of imagine myself kind of traveling through some kind of portal, and then I land at the location, and then I just kind of scan and just kind of perceive what's around me. And that's my first step of like kind of getting into this world.
Very cool. Now, I'd like to know if you could tell us about maybe some of the most successful remote viewing sessions you've had. You mentioned that you help with missing persons cases. You can actually predict future outcomes. Maybe just give us a couple of examples of, maybe for you the most profound ones that you've experienced.
Yeah, so I would say any I did work on a missing persons, and it was really, really interesting. Um, I, um, I, the minute that I put my pen on paper, I really did not feel like this person was alive. And when they contacted me, they didn't really tell me anything. I didn't even know where in the world they were or anything. But I just didn't feel like anything. But I knew that it was really important to find this location because for the families, I think it's really important. They need to have some kind of closure. So I kind of progressed through the session, and I had this image. Really, it was weird because I don't normally get a bird's eye view of things, but for some reason, I felt like I was looking down on this location, and I was able to find three three landmarks. One was a body of water. One was some kind of like dilapidated. shack with a road, and then one was a rock or a rock. And I saw the body kind of on the back with its leg bent and some blood coming off his head. And so I kind of sent that in a map kind of thing. Like I drew a picture of these three things, like to triangulate the area. So the detectives were able to, because they knew where this place was. So they were looking for those three things, like where is a shack, whatever, with a road, where is a body of water, and then something like a rock, a big boulder or rock or something. And so they did that. And me, along with other people, I wasn't the only one remote viewing this. So I'm sure that, there were tons of other people with more information. But what ended up happening, so I wasn't totally correct in everything, but I was pretty darn close. It turned out that this was a college student, male, that in that shack was actually a bar, got drunk, went over to this lake, got a boat, and the boat capsized. He bumped his head and died from a head injury. So he was actually in the water, this rock may have been the boat, and not a rock. And for me, he wasn't in the water, he was out of the water. So it was a little off, but I think all this information that all of us brought was what helped them find this guy.
Right.
And, I mean, my mission, and this is a good example, because my mission is that we can use remote viewing to help in these very important cases. And I would like these detectives to be calling us first, not as a last resort, because, it is helpful.
Yeah, definitely so. Um, Now, did you have any other sessions that were kind of stick out to you before we move on?
Any other ones? Um, I'm, let's see. What do you mean?
Like,
Like,
yeah, any other cases that you've worked on, or anything else? Any other remote viewing sessions that were particularly successful or interesting to you?
yeah, I mean, pretty much all of them are pretty good. There's a period of time where I was working on a team where we were doing financials, so helping people and businesses and whatever making money. I think that's also pretty cool that we can do things like that. And by the way, if anybody is interested, I do teach that method and the other method. And I would really, I'd like to dominate the world with remote viewing. Is that too harsh of a
No, no,
statement?
not at all. You actually have classes starting, what, May 22nd, 10 a.m. Pacific
Yeah.
time?
On Saturday mornings at 10. It's a 6-week course, and we go through this whole protocol. And I'm looking to put together a team, because there's a lot of times we get hired from people because they're missing some jewelry, or they're missing papers. We've been called to help people hunt for treasures. Um, and other interesting cases that I would never have thought of. So it's not just, the dramatic, like missing people, but it could also be things, common everyday things. And then we also get called for people that want to use us for financial advice.
That's very cool. Now, what did you do with the Institute of Noetic Sciences?
So I worked on a team there. I can't really talk too much about it yet until the papers are written.
Gotcha.
But that one is probably, I most excited when I found out who our clients were and what we were viewing in the end. It was, to me, it was just like another feather in our hat that is bringing credibility to remote viewing, because it was a very reputable client. And the fact that they're looking at remote viewing for help is fantastic. And I'm just hoping for more and more to come our way.
That's awesome. Now, you also do hypnosis for abductees and past life regressions.
Yeah. Yeah. I mostly, so I am a trained hypnotherapist and I am not actively doing it now, but I did for a while. And I got to the point where, because I like to use these things in a productive way. And so I started out with these really amazing intentions. And I would get clients that would come to me and they're like, well, I need to lose weight, or I need to, stop biting my nails. I need, all this stuff. And it always turns out that when they come for a habit that they want to change, it always turns out that the habit is something deeper. It goes a little bit deeper than what they think. They just think, oh, I bite my nails, it's a bad habit. But there's usually a reason why they're biting their nails. And so, because of hypnosis being such a quick therapeutic process, where we go right to the core of the issue, you can kind of address it within 3 sessions. I mean, you're like lickety split right there. And so what I found over time and time again is that people weren't prepared for how fast it works. And so I would have them come the first session, have them come the second session, and then when we're ready to plan the third session, they're like, yeah, let me get home and look at my calendar, and yeah, I'll call you for the next date. And I'm like, uh-huh, yeah, right, okay, yeah, you're not going to be calling. And that frustrated me because, as a therapist, I'm like, oh my God, it's working. But the truth is, it has to go at their pace. So I kind of veered away from that. And then I didn't seek out people that were abducted, but people came to me probably because of the circles I am, the social circles. And when they hear I'm a hypnotist, then they want to tell me that they were abducted, and then I'll offer to regress them. So I haven't done a lot of them, and I don't feel like I'm an expert, but I will say that 3 of them that I did, this was fascinating because I did 3 independent people. They didn't know each other. One is in Canada, one was in Chicago, and one was in California. And it was probably within a 9-month period of time that I did it. And each one of them had almost the same exact story. They all basically felt like they were on another planet and that they were underwater, breathing the water. And they would describe the vegetation under the water, but they couldn't even find the vocabulary to describe the colors and the vegetation and anything that they were seeing. They were like dumbfounded because they couldn't find the vocabulary. And I was fascinated because I'm like, what are the odds that 3 separate people don't even know each other, all coming up with the same story? And so that was fascinating to me. Um, so
Yeah,
we
that's
did
very
that.
interesting. Now, I want to ask you a question about past life regression. Do you believe that we are truly reincarnated, or could it possibly be that it's more of a collective consciousness that, we're accessing this collective memory that, this kind of universal memory that everyone shares, instead of individuals being reincarnated into separate, lives and it being separate entities? What do you think about that?
I think a little of both of what you're saying. One thing that we learn in hypnosis is that your subconscious has permanent memory, and that's a basis of everything. Your subconscious has permanent memory. That means you remember everything from all time. And what the skill of hypnosis does is it is like when they talk about the Akashic records, it's like we are pulling out, like a microchip or we're pulling out a book or something from your memory and moving it forward to your attention. And so yes, that, but I'm not going to say but, and I also believe that the purpose, it seems to me like they need this vessel to carry out different lessons in life. And I guess this is more like a philosophical thing that, sometimes your soul needs to know what it's like to be a wealthy person. And sometimes your soul needs to be poor. And sometimes it needs to be born, maybe missing a limb. It's like every experience that you could possibly imagine, the soul, in order for it to be complete, needs to experience it. So that's my personal thought and belief on that.
Yeah, I kind of always seen it as, like a kind of like a training ground, or even like a video game where you level up and you get to the next incarnation, or level of existence, or even make it out of this planet and onto some bigger and better things. Who knows? When it comes to some other of your regressions or anything like that, is there anything that sticks out in your mind, anything profound that you've been involved with hypnotherapy?
I think one thing that pops up in my mind is, and this happened very early on when I was training, and I would use my family, my poor family. I would use my family as guinea pigs. So anytime I learned something new in my class, I would come home and practice on somebody. And so when we got to the part where we're learning past life regression, I decided to practice my brother and my mother. And so I actually had a script that I was holding and reading the script and put them into a very deep trance and just led them, guided them, and really allowed them to find the place where they needed to be. I didn't want to dictate where they should go. So I just kind of had it open ended where, sometimes you want to do a past life regression for their highest good. I believe you have to set an intention about it, and then that will guide them where they're supposed to be. So that's kind of how I set up the whole thing. And so it was really funny. So I did my thing, and then it's time to wake my mom up. So I kind of woke her up out of trance, and I'm like, so how was it? And she's like, I was, my name was Nigel. I'm like, Nigel? She's like, yeah. And she starts telling this whole, sorry, she starts telling this whole story of where she was and that she wasn't her. And she was talking in real time, like it really happened. It was nothing like nothing stood out in it. It was just like interesting that it worked. And I'm like, wow, like right before my very eyes, this worked. And knowing my parents, they're pretty skeptical people anyway. So um, just the fact that they were like really, they had an experience. So then it was time to wake my brother up. And so I wake him up, and he was really deep, and he comes out and he's like really groggy. And I'm like, so, tell me about your experience. And he's like, I don't know. He's like, I was Jesus. And I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah, I was Jesus. And I'm like, okay. All right. Everyone, yeah, what? Everyone thinks they're Jesus. Everyone thinks they're Cleopatra, all this
Right.
stuff. So I'm like, let's just let this percolate a little bit. And I'll get back to you in a couple days, and we'll talk about it more, because you'll get more clarity, because we open up a door, and so when you do that, you're kind of inviting more information to come in. So a couple days later, I called him up on the phone, and I'm like, wasn't it so funny that you thought you were Jesus? Like, wasn't that funny? And he's like, no. And he's like, he says it like I'm the idiot. No, I wasn't Jesus. I was like, like a Jesus or something. I'm like, oh, okay. I go, well, when we get together, I'll hypnotize you again and we'll get more clarity. He's like, I'm there now. And we're on the phone. And I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah, I'm there now. I'm like, okay, and I'm thinking I don't have my script with me. What am I gonna do?
Huh.
I'm kind of panicking.
Right.
And so then I just came up, I just kind of was curious. So I'm like, well, tell me about where you are. And so he starts, and like, you obviously you don't know my brother, but if you knew him, this is not like him to be like a good sport or anything. Like, usually he's yelling at me for my crazy, wacky ideas. So the fact that he was like doing this, I really believed he was in trance. He popped back in. So he's describing in details. The first thing he's like, wow, it smells like mules. Like, I smell the animals here. He goes, I feel like there's a lot of sand around me. I'm in like where these tents, and he's like, I'm kind of shopping like a shook or something. And he's describing he had a bracelet on his wrist that was made of leather, like details. And then he's like offering information like, it's braided. I made it myself. And I'm like, okay. And he's going on. And then I took him, to the time of his death in this life. And he's like, I said, okay, I'm going to, take you to the time of your death. What's going on? He's like, I'm falling. And I'm like, okay, describe. And he's like, well, I'm going, ah. I'm like, I go, no, describe your surroundings. He's like, I'm falling down a hole or a well, and I see my body and I see blood coming out of my mouth. And I said, oh, okay. And he goes, somebody pushed me. I said, somebody pushed you down this well? And he's like, yeah. I said, could this be why you're afraid of heights? And he said, yes, yes. And I'm like, okay. And so I know that, I want to be productive. I want this to be helpful. So we added some therapeutic stuff where we started doing kind of a healing to this lifetime. We asked for forgiveness. And we kind of just mended it. We kind of healed it basically. And then I woke him up, and that was the end of it. So about, I don't know, 3 months later, I asked him, how's it going? Like, do you still feel that you're afraid of heights? How's that going? And he's like, well, I'll tell you what. He goes, I feel now I have a healthy fear of heights. Like before I was paralyzed, now I feel like, it's healthy. Like, I should have somewhat of a fear of heights. So I was just really excited about that. And it was like an impromptu thing. And I learned so much from that experience. Number one, that I don't have to be with him face to face for this to happen. It's just like, it was like all matter, all time, all everything just disappeared between us. And it just taught me like this bigger view of what we're living in.
Right. Yeah, that is really cool. I've always kind of been interested in, and I'd like to have a somewhat of a regression done, just because I think that I've had a couple of possible contact experiences that I may not remember. So I find that stuff fascinating, and I'd like to eventually get something like that done, but just haven't gotten around to it yet. So hopefully in the future, maybe so. But
Yeah.
I do want to kind of shift the conversation a little bit, because you sent me some interesting topics in the email earlier, and one of them is Bigfoot, which recently, I don't know what it is there's something that's been drawing me towards this topic. I've had different guests talking about Bigfoot. I've had different synchronicities. We may be going on a little expedition kind of hunting for Bigfoot soon. So lots of things happening, kind of drawing me towards the Bigfoot topic, which I was never really big on when I first started doing the show. It just kind of grew on me and started becoming a more popular topic for me in this show. So what do you know about Bigfoot, and have had you any experiences or information?
Well, that's a good thing. I think that, I do have a team of like six or seven people, and I really think that I should, do more uh targets on Bigfoot, because you're right, it is seeming to kind of grow, because this idea of the possibility of it being an interdimensional being, and that idea, and the fact that it seems like these three subjects, Bigfoot, aliens, or aliens, and also paranormal, it seems to me that there's an area where they all sort of weave into each other.
Yes, definitely.
And I think one of the things that's really, like, with remote viewing is, you have to the secret question that they don't know has to be carefully crafted. It's a very important part of remote viewing. The viewers get a lot of attention because they're viewing and they're collecting data, but behind the scenes is, how do we ask the question to get the answer? You've heard probably many times where people say, you're not asking the right question. And that's what takes some time, is crafting that question, and then being prepared for the answer that remote viewers will give us. In So the experience that I had with remote viewing was just really nothing really deep or anything, but we wanted to know if the Patterson-Gimlin footage was a hoax. And that was basically the target. So it wasn't like this deep thing about Bigfoot. It was just really about that footage. And so I had somebody monitoring me. Again, I had no idea that I was looking at Bigfoot, because, we're practicing almost every day or weekly or whatever. So it could be anything that they're asking me. But what was really interesting, because I know there's rumors out there, or the idea that this Bigfoot is a female. And it was what came through in this session, and a big personal lesson that I learned about myself, to really trust myself, was that right out of the gate, I perceived a female. But what was really weird is, part of me, again, I told you about that left brain, brain thing. My left brain and right brain were fighting, because what I was perceiving didn't match what my left brain wanted me to say. So what was happening was, I kept getting this enormous female, and it was bothering me. I'm like, it's like a basketball player. Like, she's humongous, and these bones. And I kept touching my arm and, like, feeling like my bones were like humongous. And I was just having this physical reaction. And part of me kept going, well, change it to male. And then the other part of me is like, no, it's a female. And it was just going back and forth like that. So my monitor saw me struggling and said, okay, I want you to stand up. I want you to blend with the subject. And so I blended with the subject, and he said, okay, touch your body and describe. So I'm touching my body, and I'm feeling this big, enormous arm. I'm like, whoa, there's a lot of hair. And then I'm thinking, yeah, it's a male. And again, I'm like, no, it's a female. I kept doing it. But I felt a lot of hair. And so once we got all that down pat, where I was describing the subject, the monitor kind of put me in a different direction, like, to just try to find out the origin of this subject, and any kind of other information. And I was tuning into a lot of emotions. And there was this emotion of protective, and there was a hurried feeling, and there was this whole kind of narrative that I came up with. And at some point, I wasn't sure if my left brain took over and started making up a story or if it's a real thing. And, we can't verify it, but I was getting this whole idea of kind of like a tribal, and this whole description of a tribal. There was family units and children and things like that. Um, and then once I finished the session, and he told me it was, it was Bigfoot, it was the Patterson-Gimlin footage. And he said, "So what do you think, Michelle? Is it a hoax, or is it real?" I said, "Without a doubt, it's real. It's real. I blended with that guy or that girl, that lady. I
Right.
felt her feelings. I felt her body, um, and I just can't be convinced that it's a fake or a hoax."
Yeah, to me, that footage is one of the most compelling that I've seen. It's the original, one of the original Bigfoot evidence, but I think it's one of the best that we have. And it's very interesting that you said, tribal kind of family unit, because I've heard from different Bigfoot researchers before that that's kind of the way they operate. So that's very interesting.
Hmm. Yeah, there was a very like a protectiveness. Like I saw like children or babies or whatever, and there were like family units kind of thing. So, but I definitely think that we need to do more in terms of remote viewing. It would be really cool to come up with some more sessions on that.
Definitely so. Now, there's something else you wrote me in the email, which I'm not too sure what it is. I have my ideas, but Skinny Bob. Is this a type of cryptid?
No, so I can't. So if all right, if you look up Skinny Bob,
Uh huh.
and once you see on YouTube and you see the video, you'll be like, "Oh, him." It's just I don't think people know that they call him Skinny Bob. So yeah, I'll let you look at. I
Yeah,
want
go ahead and kind of describe it while I look this up.
so Skinny Bob is this possible alleged or possible alien, like, and it looks like a gray. And this, yeah, I see your face.
Yeah, yeah, I know what you're
Yeah,
talking
that
about. Yep.
one. But I guess people didn't know that he's called Skinny Bob. So that project was set up, and I actually spent the weekend because somebody put a message on Facebook about it, and John Vivanco, we reviewed it. We remote reviewed it in 2017,
Now,
and so he
when
made
was
a
this
YouTube.
Skinny Bob footage supposedly originally put out there?
That was put out in, I don't know the date. Nine, it,
The 90s?
90s?
Yeah,
It
believe it
may have been
was.
in the 90s, but it's evidently comes from the 40s or I
Yeah,
don't know.
right.
It's supposedly, and it was put up on YouTube or wherever it was. It was put up there by what they believe is, because it says KGB, so some Russian guy, and nobody can find that guy, and there is no information except for that's up there, and so it's always been curious, and I know that John has always been curious. So what he did was, he would so we would be his practice team, and we were always practicing. And so what he did was he had, as I told you, the questions are very important. So he had basically three questions, which means three separate sessions that we would have to do. And so what he decided to do is mix these three sessions into all the other ones that he gives us. So that way it's like double, triple, quadruple blind. And if those sessions come up where it's all similar data, then it will really kind of prove a point. So we worked on that, um, and basically, yeah, I had to remind myself. So what I was saying is somebody put it up on Facebook recently, and they were talking about Skinny Bob, and I'm like, oh yeah, I did that. I had to go back and look at my session, so I'm glad that I looked at them today so that I can remind myself what I wrote because it was a while ago. So basically, um, three things. What were the three things we wanted to know? One was, is it a hoax? That was the first thing. We Is it real or a hoax? The second tasking was to you know to remote view this subject known as Skinny Bob at the moment that it was recorded. And what that will tell us is this somebody in a costume, or is it somebody real? Because we would get data that would say something like, oh, there's a mask, or, this subject is, fake, or you would get some information about that. And the third thing that we wanted to know was, where did the subject come from? And all these questions are perfectly uh, created so that we can tell if it's real or hoax. Because if now you ask, where does the subject come from? And then you start describing some neighborhood in the suburbs versus it's from some other planet, and start describing the planet, then you'll see the difference between it's just a way to kind of weed out the real and the fake. So in our sessions, we really started out um, describing a subject that was non-human. That was the first thing that was interesting. And some of us, there were three of us working on it, and one person actually drew uh, the a face that looks like the Greys, and that showed up in his session. And we were also tuned. I tend to get a lot of emotions from subjects when I'm remote viewing. So there was this idea or this feeling that they were alone and irritated, and they felt, left behind. And also, if you watch the video, it's about a crash, and it will show, I believe it's three other, like his friends or family or whatever, three that died, and then he actually lived, and they were, I feel, I want to say, interrogated him, and he was getting pretty upset. I think it felt like he was starting out, like a good sport, whatever, but then at some point he was not very happy with that. And then he ended up dying in custody. And a lot of my session does describe the origin of where he comes from. There's a lot of crystalline as energy, like they seem to be using crystals as energy. And whenever I do esoteric targets on UFOs, crystals always show up. And it makes me start to think that these intelligent life that would be visiting us, they're using a different kind of technology with using crystals, because they show up all the time. And so that also showed up there too. So it was really, really interesting session. And if you go to Right Hemispheric and Skinny Bob, you'll see our sessions. He'll put our pieces of our session so you can see little chunks of information and how it relates to the asked. So it's a very cool video.
Yeah, that is really cool. Now, before you head out, Michelle, thank you for coming, by the way. That was fantastic information. I'd like to get your thoughts on what is actually happening right now with, there's a lot of stuff going on with talk of disclosure and UFOs from our mainstream media, information coming out of the Pentagon. We're supposed to have this big information dump next month, which is probably going to be pushed back and most of the information redacted, but we'll see what we can get out of that. But do you think that it's for a reason? Do you think that they know something that we don't, that possibly disclosure is imminent either way, or maybe it's an excuse for them to roll out some new technology? I don't know. What do you think?
Um, God, I'm not sure. Um, I have so many different ways to look at all that. Um, the first thing that I've noticed is different countries handle this differently. And I wonder, like some of the countries like Russia, Australia, even the UK are very casual. Like people just kind of, yeah, there's UFOs. It's not like here in America where it's kind of cloaked with this like big mystery and like, and this conspiracies happening and this dread and horrible thing. In the other countries, when I talk to people, it just feels like, yeah, of course, we definitely want to find evidence. We want to know more and things like that. So I really don't know, because I hear things that people say is like America, they think that we're not ready to hear it. But I just don't think that that's the case. I just don't. It could have like, I don't know. What do you think? Like, do
Well, I
you think
agree. I
it's a
think I think we're
control?
ready for it, but I don't trust any of the information coming out from our mainstream media or government because I've never did. And when they're talking about
Yeah,
stuff like UFOs, it's not going to change my mind to automatically trust them. I'm going to pay
right.
attention to the information, but I think there's probably more nefarious agendas behind it. I could even go as far as to say they could be planning something fake. I don't know. I just, I really don't trust it, but I am interested in it and I'm going to keep an eye on it to see where they're going with it.
This is the thing. Like, this would be an exact thing to remote view, honestly,
Right,
because
yes.
um, again, we would have, what we could do is you can give me a bunch of questions that you want answers to, and we can have the team remote view them, and then maybe you can, talk about them on your show sometime.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah, that would be very interesting. I'd love to
Yeah,
do that.
email me some of your questions that you have, and I'm not going to tell them anything. I won't tell them that it's from you, and I
Right.
won't tell them what the subject matter is. I'll just kind of stick it into all their practice targets, and then I can send it a summary to you, and then
Oh, that'd be
you
interesting.
can,
Yeah.
yeah, that might be fun.
Definitely so. Yeah, I'd love to do that. Yeah, I'll go ahead and work something up for you. That'd be awesome. Now, Michelle, thanks so much for coming out today. Now, before you head out, let everyone know, if they're interested in signing up for your classes, website, social media, just anything that they can go look up as much information as possible.
Thank you so much. So, my website is butterflyeffectcenter.com, and there's all the stuff about hypnosis, and then there's a page for remote viewing. And my next course starts on the 22nd of May, and it's really fun, and you're going to learn a whole bunch about yourself. And just message me if you have any questions. I think there's a contact form there. And yeah, I would love to have lots of students in there and share my passion.
Awesome. Yes, definitely go check that out, everyone. And I am definitely going to work up some questions for you so we can get our own little remote viewing session going and report it to everyone. So that's going to be fun. Michelle, thank you so much for stopping by today. I'd love to talk to you more in the future.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Of course, yes. And until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening, and we'll talk again tomorrow.